Welcome to the Gift of the Struggle. I am Elizabeth Denham here with Corey Harvard. We are going to have a really great, I've been excited about this conversation for a while. We've been making sure the timing was exactly right before we jumped right into this. But let me tell you a little bit about Corey. I'm going to read a bio that he has that does not reflect who he is in our community and in this world, but I'm going to start with that. Corey received his BA in English and philosophy from the University of South Alabama, where he was editor-in-chief of the Oracle Fine Arts Review. He's a songwriter since middle school, plays gigs around Mobile on a regular basis, and frequently brings his love for poetry and music into the work he does at Prism United. Whenever he gets the opportunity, he backpacks and tries to grow things. So that's the high-level, watered-down version. Corey is co-founder of Prism United, correct?
Right.
Which has been in existence for about 5 years now and has grown it from no budget to increasing year over year budgets. We're about to do a big capital campaign. I do some volunteer work with Corey. He's made a huge impact in the LGBTQ community and is modest enough not to want to toot his own horn, but I will toot it for him. Without him, I don't know where a lot of these children. Prism focuses on the youth in our area that are LGBTQ and has made a significant impact and stride, I think, in our community for acceptance, self-acceptance, community acceptance, and progress. And we'll talk a little bit briefly in the opening about what the plans are for Prism, because I think it's important to just note that so that if anybody wants to get involved, they can. So Corey, why don't you give us a brief little rundown on the history of Prism and what the plans are and the goals are and what your role has been and evolved through over time, just real quick, and then we'll jump into the topic of our conversation.
Sure. So Prism came into existence in 2018, but I started doing work in LGBTQ youth programming a couple years before that. And when I started this, I was living, and we'll get into this later, but living in a closet space above an ice cream shop in Gulf Shores. And my mom said, there's this church in Mobile, Alabama that wants to do the thing that you've always wanted to do, which was create a support group for LGBTQ high schoolers. And so that was my signal to go home. And I joined this project as a facilitator originally, and would stay up late after the support group gatherings and scrub glitter glue off of tables. I would rearrange the furniture. I mean, I would be up there until like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, just full of energy and excitement and so much love for the opportunity to get to do this thing that I always dreamed of. And so 2 years after this project that involved another organization, was running, that organization disbanded and it created this opening. And that's when my friend Justin and I decided that we wanted to create a nonprofit because we had already been doing the work. And truthfully, when we started doing this in 2016, we were kind of invited to be a part of something. And what actually happened is we started building our own curriculum. We started coming up with our own training. Started coming up with our own design plans and branding. And so truthfully, when the other organization shut down and that opening was created, we were like, well, we basically have all the things we need to start a nonprofit. And so we created it together. At the beginning, it was just that support group for high schoolers. In a very short amount of time, we started hearing from parents who are saying, could you do something for middle schoolers too? Our middle schoolers desperately need a space. And so we created a unique curriculum for for middle schoolers with the help of an educator here in town. And then we created a program for parents. Truthfully, it's just grown because people reach out and they say, we need support in order to make sure that our kids are okay and that we're okay for our kids. And then I heard from Sarah Fisher at some point in Fairhope, and with her help and her talent, we created programming in Fairhope on the Eastern Shore. And it's just kind of grown ever since. And of course, Elizabeth, you're running our Prism families on the Eastern Shore. I really think that what we did is we stepped in and we listened from the very beginning. This is the talent of Prism, is that we have always put out surveys and have aggressively sought the feedback and input of the community, and we've just created programs according to what the community's needed. And so our core programs are Prism Teens, Prism Preteens, Prism Families, and we have services. So we refer people to therapy, to affirming doctors. We have something called the Prism Healing Fund, where we cover the cost of therapy for anybody who's LGBTQ who can't afford it. And our most recent part of our journey is we were selected to be recipients of something called the Way Out Grant. And that grant money is going to be the seed money for us to kick off a capital campaign to acquire a building. And that building is not going to just let us run our programs and services. We're going to get to serve housing insecure LGBTQ youth. And this has been probably the pinnacle of the dream from the beginning, is not just to be a support group. It's not just to refer kids to providers who can support them. It's to support those kids who have been kicked out of home or just feel like they don't have a place they can call home. And this space is going to allow us to do that. So that's maybe the best I can do at an abridged picture of Prism United.
Yeah. Well, and I think that does it in a nutshell. But I think it's so exciting because I know that in our area in particular in the South, we're in Mobile, Alabama, and then the eastern shore of Alabama across Mobile Bay. There is a lot of housing insecurity for LGBTQ youth. And I don't know how many all calls I've seen where we're trying to find somewhere for a homeless youth or someone being kicked out or someone even with a temporary need, finding somebody who can take them in. And it's complex. There are legal ramifications. There are for both the child or the young person and the family. And having that kind of a housing thing is going to resolve so many of those emergent issues, I think. So I can't wait. So everybody needs to stay tuned because we've got a lot going on, and there are a lot of ways you can support either financially or with your time or your resources. So make sure that you're following Prism United on all the social media and getting on their mailing list so that if you have an interest in that, we can help them grow this program.
Yeah.
So now for why we are here. Corey has a really great gift of the struggle story to share. And it's a story of grief and loss and recovery and hope. So let's just start with your history in terms of coming out, your college experience, your personal experience, and how that impacted your relationships and your perception of self, your confidence, your place in the world. All of those things get impacted when you're going through a lot of these processes. And so tell us a little bit about your backstory so that we can then get into the next phase.
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town called Grand Bay, Alabama, which is known for its watermelon festivals. And Grand Bay is very conservative, like many small towns in Alabama, very religious. If you're looking for an opportunity to socialize as a kid, it's probably going to be at church. Mm-hmm. And as a kid, I really took to what I learned at church and wanted to be a faithful Christian. And so, and to a degree that most kids, I think, it's not that serious of a thing. And so as early as middle school, I got the nickname as Preacher Boy because I was leading prayer at the pole and was, playing some kind of leadership role at Cubs for Christ. And I always had my Bible next to me when I was going from class to class. And I'd like to think that I wasn't a super judgmental person. But I know that for me, I just took that journey of this God is the most ultimate thing that you can be interested in. So why wouldn't everybody want to be interested in this? And I grew up in a really lovely household that supported me in whatever interests I had. And they, of course, were excited that I wanted to go to church all the time and maybe one day do something in ministry. I was also a very musical creature. And so from a young age, started learning how to play the piano, self-taught. Um, and that kind of folded into being a person of faith and being able to be a worship leader in a lot of those spaces. And so, truthfully, even though my family didn't have a lot of money, I know they certainly struggled at times. I didn't really see that. I grew up in a really secure household with very loving parents. In a lot of ways, kind of the dream situation for any kid, I think. And then I hit middle school, and it became very clear to me that I was attracted to boys. And I knew that was going to be a really big problem. And so at that time, I didn't know any other gay people. So that's something to keep in mind. I tell people that I thought I was the only gay person in Grand Bay. And it's true. I really did think I was the only gay person in this part of the state, really. And so I decided that like the only path forward was to fight this and to overcome it. I thought it was God's way of calling me closer to Him. That was what made sense to me at the time. And so I committed to celibacy from middle school all the way through high school. And of course, watched.
A test?
Say that again.
Did you feel like it was a test from God that you had to pass?
Yeah, I mean, there were things I read into the scriptures. So I journaled a lot as a kid, and so there was Job, the passage, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." I thought it was kind of this like refining struggle. There was the story, I think, of Jacob wrestling with God, and where he's renamed Israel, which is one who struggles with God. And so I saw these stories of struggle in Scripture. As a kind of test of faith and of becoming more of a person of faith and spirituality. And so yes, is I guess the short answer to your question.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in middle school, you're fighting it. You take this vow of celibacy that only you know about, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And in the middle of all this, I'm writing songs and I'm processing this struggle through poetry and songwriting. I really throw myself into those things. They were my first true loves. But when I hit 8th grade, I write this song that I play in my 8th grade talent show, and it wins me the talent show. And around this time, my pediatrician, Dr. Perry, had heard about me being a musician, I think writing music. And he was talking to my mom one day and said, "My boys are wanting to be in a band. My daughter's already in a band called Eutychus. Would Corey like to join?" And so one part of my story that sometimes I even forget to share with people I care about, that I'm getting to know, is that for a spell of my life, for about, I guess, a few years, I was very involved with this band that was traveling all over the Southeast and playing gigs. And that band ended up becoming the band Perry someday. They have a big hit called "If I Die Young." Yeah. But at the time, it was just me with the brothers in Kimberly. They weren't together as the band Perry yet. Right. And we were in a Christian music band. And so, again, it was kind of right into what I was already interested in. And the truth is, I left that band because as I got closer to them, I was realizing that my sexuality, the struggle, it didn't seem like it was getting better. It felt like it was getting stronger. And I was starting to feel more and more isolated in it, even though I wasn't acting on anything, right? I was just attracted to boys, but I wasn't doing anything with boys. And I would find myself listening to music and like my mind just turning it into music videos. And it was always me like rescuing a boy or being rescued by a boy. And then I realized that like, oh God, there it is. It's always just there. And so there was a part of me that felt like if they ever knew that I was gay, that they might never accept me. And they were the most important people in my life at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was so excruciating to think that they might reject me that I left the band. And it was actually maybe one of the first big moments of grief in my life, because it seemed like such a clear path to a passion. And my parents didn't have a lot of money, so it's not like they were going to be able to fund some dream of being a musician. Um, and so, yeah, that was maybe the first moment that my sexuality, there was like a cost. And even as a kid that I had to deal
How
with.
old were you when you left the band?
I think that I was 17 when I left the band, and I was, I guess, 13 or 14 when I joined.
So that was a fear-based decision.
Yeah, yeah, and it was. I will say that in the industry, in some of the things that some people around the family, there was some conservative culture, some folks watching Fox News and things like that, and so I had reasons to believe that it could be a problem if I came out. Now, whether or not those reasons would have panned out to be true, who knows? But in my brain, it was enough.
This is what happens when you're in isolation as a young person, because you don't have anybody to talk you through all of these things, right?
That's right.
So you're doing whatever you think you need to do for self-preservation.
Survive.
Whether it would happen or not.
Yeah, that's right.
Which becomes more and more isolating, right?
Yeah, you double down, and here's the thing is kids are not wrong to do that, right? Like we can underestimate that children pick up on messaging. They're socialized just like the rest of us, right? And so whether it's explicit or implicit, there's a lot of messaging in this world, or at least when I was growing up, that was homophobic, and it still exists today. A lot of heterosexist messaging, and I was picking up on that. And the truth is, though, I had the internet. I was reading what other Christian apologists were saying, and that's kind of the path I wanted to go on. So the direction I was taking in my life was one that was immersing me in a culture that was kind of teaching me to repress and to have some self-loathing for my sexuality.
Yeah, which I think that's still very common. I mean, I think things are changing, but having my son who's 23, so he's younger than you, still having a lot of those same feelings and fears.
Yes,
it's a very slow process of change, and that's why I think Prism United, if that had been there for him when he was that age, that middle school and high school years, he might have felt a little bit less isolated and afraid. So, so you're 17 now. You've left the band Perry. What comes next?
So I leave the band Perry, and then I jump right into being a worship leader in Mobile at Knollwood Church. And it was a very big youth group when I first joined. Before I was even worship leading, there was I think 200 kids coming, and I was still really fighting my sexuality. Had convinced myself that this was just maybe the thing that I was going to have to struggle with for the rest of my life, and was increasingly feeling the mental health impacts of it. And so I can look back and remember moments where I was kind of dissociating and feeling a lot of depression, and I would turn to music and poetry to deal with that in a healthy way, I think. But that was getting worse and worse. And so what ended up happening, I start going to the University of South Alabama, majoring in English at first. And when I went in, I had a scholarship. I had always been a really good student, always been an A student. But in that first year, things start coming apart. And I'm struggling to keep up with my part-time job. I'm struggling to keep up with college. The truth is that between classes, I'm feeling this immense social anxiety. I'm feeling very fixated on, can people tell that I'm gay? Very fixated on, whether or not I was going to be able to make it through college, because it was absorbing me so much. And what ended up happening is it got so bad that I stopped going to work, and I stopped going to class, and I started just sleeping in, and I felt really paralyzed and confined to my space. And there came a point to where everything, it felt like I was failing everything. And so I felt like I had I lost my scholarship because suddenly I had to drop all my classes. And so in my mind, I'm going, I'm a failure. Like I'm never going to go back to school. I'm not able to keep this part-time job. Fortunately, there were people picking up on this. And so, for instance, there was this Buddhist coworker that I had at work who was probably the first real sage in my life. And she would do things like write little notes on sticky notes. And one was a quote from Leonard Cohen's Anthem, and it's the ring the bell that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I would carry that around with me everywhere. And there were little things like that that really helped me get through. But there was a moment where I had started coming out to a couple people, and it felt really good to come out. And I was noticing that, but I was also feeling the tension of having not told my parents. Okay. And the worst night, the hardest night, I remember sitting outside the window with my legs hanging out at Knollwood Apartments, and it was only 2 floors, so I knew it wouldn't kill me if I jumped, but I was actively thinking, what would it feel like to just not have to struggle with any of this anymore? And I sat there for a while, and then finally I kind of had a breakdown, and I remember running through the apartment complex and running across the street and not stopping. Like I don't think that I was really even aware of anything going on around me. And I ran out to Knollwood. It's like middle of the night, maybe like midnight. And I just remember getting to a field and just falling down and just crying and screaming until my throat was sore. And there were some friends of mine who I think had figured out somehow that I wasn't okay that day. So one friend came back to check on me. So other people they couldn't tell that I was not doing well. And that person knew that I would go to the park sometimes at night to walk. And so they found me, and a couple of my friends came over and crawled in bed with me, and we all just passed out. And that was really the turning point in my life. It was really one of the first lowest moments and first big moments of grief. And I think it was really about having to let go of an identity that, even if it was hurting me, it's how I moved through the world for the first 18, 19 years of my life.
So were you grieving the illusion of heterosexuality?
The illusion that I could overcome my sexuality, the illusion that I could hold on to a faith that was no longer working for me in the way that I had been practicing it. Because in the midst of all this, I was having these kind of, aside from the issue of my sexuality, some theological problems that I couldn't square. And so this thing that was my identity and that gave my life meaning was crumbling. And so a lot of it was grieving that. And I mean, think about it. I had skipped the opportunity to date people, to try to explore what it would be like to love people, to be in relationship in a certain way, because I wanted to be so devoted to this thing. And now I'm looking back at that moment, and it's like I missed out on all of these years. So there was that kind of grief in it too, of kind of grieving for a Corey that never got to exist.
Well, it's grieving for the normal awakening and maturation that most children get to go through from 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, where you like someone, or hold a little hand, and to middle school where you develop attraction and it becomes a little more real, and to high school where you have relationships. I mean, even, my son came out at 16, but up until that point, he had dated girls because he was doing the same thing, trying to embrace. He had decided that was what he was going to try to do. And I that to me is always very sad, because people don't understand the loss of the ability to have a normal, maturing evolution in experimenting with relationships.
Yeah.
So those are formative years. So I would imagine that, coupled with faith, which is almost innate to who you are, you feel like it is. Grief, that's a big period of grief.
Yeah, that's a piece of what was so important to me when we get back to like where we get to Prism.
Hmm.
Um, is I look back on those early years and I think about how even at like school dances,
Hmm.
part of that maturation is knowing what it feels like to be a body in relationship to other bodies, right? It's knowing when I like someone, what does it mean to communicate that like to someone? When I am heartbroken by somebody, what does it mean to move through that like heartbreak and readjust your expectations? There's a whole joy and chaos and just an essential part, I think, of being young and getting to be a little bit messy in that youth. That's really just a part of learning who you are.
Yeah. And the
And
kids should be able to go through the hell of unrequited loves and parents fussing at you for sneaking out with a boy or a girl or whoever,
yeah, and what happens is
that's part of it.
yes, and so many of us are on the outside, wishing that we could be in, right, and feeling the separation between us who are like so self-conscious that we might be outed, and realizing really in very intense ways that we can't dance with the person we want to dance with or present in the way that we want to present. What it does is it just kind of steals from young LGBTQ people those formative rites of passage type of experiences.
Yeah. And I would imagine probably stunts some emotional growth just because you
Yeah.
don't get to start it until later.
Yeah.
So you go from this low point where you have this breakdown, you have your friends, you're in this process of grief. That's a turning point for you,
A
right?
turning point. Yeah. Because what starts happening is I realize that when I come out to people, I have these moments of release and all the turmoil goes away for a moment at least.
Mhm.
And so my brain goes, maybe we should just start doing this a little bit more and see what happens. And so I did. I came out to more friends, came out to some gay people. Eventually, in that time, in a really short amount of time, I come out to my parents. And even though they're like, do not see it coming, they were like, you are going to be, in the ministry, like preacher boy, preacher kid. Um, they did an amazing job at accepting me. At first, there was some of that, like we don't know if we'll really understand it, uh, but I think with the tools they had and the limited access to people who were affirming, it was just kind of an ideal situation. They went to therapy. They got the message from the therapist pretty quickly that the problem wasn't with me, and that the journey for them was to learn how to accept and embrace me, and they picked it right up. And so my quality of life just completely rebounded, and I re-enrolled at USA, was on the president's list pretty much every year from that point on till I graduated, and graduated with honors. And and my GPA was just in the pits because of what I had gone through. Um, but my spirit was just alive in a way it never had been. And so there was this kind of like renaissance feeling for me in the midst of all this, of, oh, I get to experience love, and I can be free. And it was beautiful. It was a really special moment in my life. I will say that something that happens at this period in my life is I shift from going like life is about this journey of faith to life is about having whatever my mom and dad has. And so I end up in a couple relationships that last for a really long time in here. So wonderful things are happening. I'm rebounding, but I'm also just throwing myself into being a boyfriend. And for the next 8 years of my life, I end up in two long relationships. One that lasts about 3.5 years and another that lasts about 5 years.
You're trying to emulate the long-term good marriage of your parents.
Yeah, the stability, the warmth, the thing. I think what it was I felt so kind of betrayed by my experience of what happened with my faith that my brain was going, well, where is security? Like, where can I find the thing that is constant and stable? And so,
Lose your faith during this time?
what's that?
Did you completely just lose your faith during this time, or What happened?
Not really. I would say that my faith evolved rapidly. What I found was there were a lot of people doing theology that was uh, around deconstruction. So I would say I started deconstructing my faith in my late teens, and just found out that this tradition has been alive and well from the beginning, that people have come to different conclusions about scripture and theology. And so I just started paying attention to those people. But I didn't see those kind of churches in this community. And so I guess I kind of told myself that this will be a very personal journey from here on out. And I'll just leave the congregational stuff to other people, you know. So it was there. But I get in these relationships, and what happens is over the span of those relationships, I find that I'm lost again. And if you fast forward from my teenage years to I'm like 25 years old, I think I was 25, 21. I was 27 years old. I'm sorry. And I'm at the end of this 5-year relationship, and I'm living in Gulf Shores. And we've been breaking up and getting back together and breaking up and getting back together. And finally, the last breakup happens while I'm out of town at an artist retreat, and I'm living with this person. So like I'm driving back from the artist retreat, like knowing that it's over, and trying to think like, how do I restart my life? Like, how do I get my stuff? Where am I going to live? And I didn't want to move right back to Mobile. And so I call my friend, Matt Lumpkin, and he owns an ice cream shop. And he says, you know, if you need to crash on my couch, feel free. And so I crash on his couch for a couple days, and then I see that there's a closet space. And I'm like, Matt, can I use your closet space? And he said, sure, you can just move out whatever you need. So I get a twin size blow up mattress, throw it in the closet space, and I live in that closet for about 6 months.
Literally went back in the closet.
And I'm in this place that has like no, like this, of course, has no windows. So it's like, it is just so dark. But for that time in my life, it was kind of the second collapse of everything, right? The first one was my faith. And this one was this collapse of trust in that relationships will absolutely be the thing that carries me through life and gives me security. And so now I'm grappling with this new reality of things fall apart and nothing is guaranteed, and life changes, and security may never be something that is entirely attainable. And the truth is, Elizabeth, I think about this moment as the moment really where my life began in a way that was it was maybe me stepping into my adulthood. It might be one way to frame it, but in that closet space, I devoted that time to journaling constantly, to processing how I had developed these like behaviors of codependence, how I had really lost myself in relationships. And what came out of it was this desire to move through the world in a way that wasn't so clingy, that wasn't so much about trying to hold on to the thing that was going to carry me through the world. What also came out of it was this desire to reconnect with myself and learn how to really love myself in a way that I had never done.
Well, and I find too that because when you're talking about this as a parent, you think about how your children evolve through their lives and their relationships, and what you have to teach them. And in terms of trusting yourself to find that stability, or trusting yourself that if you lose that stability, that it can be temporary, and that you can be the catalyst that gets you back on track, and not your faith necessarily, and not your parents, and not your relationship, but that you are the one thread that follows all of those paths, right?
That's right. Yeah, that was the realization. And it was that I will walk with me everywhere, right? Like no matter what happens out here, maybe part of the realization was I don't have control over these external variables, and things that may seem stable now may not be stable in the future. Like things that seem like they may last forever now may end. So I remember something I was just actively thinking to myself was, I want to learn how to accept this deep truth of life, which is that change is going to happen. Suffering is going to happen. Can I learn how to let go with grace? Can I learn how to let go without contributing so much more meaning and suffering to the letting go. And I think that's why it was such an important moment in my life, is that I really reconnected with things that were important to me about me. And I think fell in love with my own journey. I dreamt about doing music and making money as a musician. And so I moved back to Mobile and I did that. And around like a little bit before I moved back to Mobile is when my mom called and said, there's a church that's launching a support group for LGBTQ high schoolers. And so, I mean, that was everything I wanted to do. And I started traveling, just doing things that I always wanted to do. And I would say in the couple years before Prism started, and while I was really reconnecting to myself, I lived it out. I mean, I would date people and was just more honest from the beginning about who I was and the path that I was on. And suddenly, instead of looking for someone to complete me, I felt like I was looking for someone to walk on this path with me that was kind of walking in the same direction. But I developed this feeling that I'm going to be okay no matter what, because I trust myself and I trust my path. Like incredible season of my life.
So when you're living in this closet, do you know that that's what you're doing? Is this an intentional act, or is this just something that you did as a result of all these different experiences? And now looking back on it, you see what that time meant to you.
I think all that I knew is that I wanted to stop feeling like I was at war with myself. Mm-hmm. And so when I was actually in the closet, what I was doing was getting really close to my pain. And that's what the journaling was. It was me really looking at myself in a way that I hadn't been looking at myself before. But I don't think that I really saw the full picture and was like, I'm on this journey to learn how to
self-actualization.
Yeah. I think it just happened in that suffering.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing for people to remember too. If you're struggling with something like that, you don't always see, the lens is not always out here. It's usually right up close, and you can't see the big picture during that time. But I think trusting that you're in a place that you need to be during a time that you need to be there, and it's a temporary place, can be helpful. Like one of the things I always say when I've interviewed people about the gift of the struggle is, I have things that I have not figured out what the gift is that are struggles, but I know that I will figure that out. And I think the knowing of that sometimes, even if you can't quite pinpoint it, helps you take those steps forward every day, right? Yeah. So I think knowing that whatever journey you're on, there is a purpose to it. When the lens is too close for you to see it, just knowing that you'll figure it out, I think can be something in the back of your mind in terms of trusting yourself, that it's gonna be better. Yeah,
I think that trusting yourself piece is the biggest gift to me. Because again, I do think there is suffering and struggle that is meaningless. I don't think that, holocausts happen so that people can learn, lessons. I think that there is just sometimes great, terrible pain in the world. But I do think that sometimes out of suffering, people learn how to trust themselves, and it changes everything about your life.
Yeah, I think so too. And I have two friends who've lost children in the last couple of weeks, and they're senseless deaths, meaningless deaths. But I know that these families will find some way to survive it and then thrive again, and then find a meaning, and find a place to put that in their lives and their grief, and make it rise out of the ashes, as you say. I think things are there. I agree with you. I don't think there's a God doesn't kill a child, because there's a plan. I think things happen, and how we are able to frame that in our lives is what gets you through to survival, right? And to thriving, and to helping somebody else. Even if the gift is only helping the next person who goes through it, that's still a tremendous gift to know that survival is possible in the worst of times, right?